Hey guys, I'm here with the one and only Tyler Hurriwind Whitney, the midlaner for United, here to ask some questions about Phase 2, Phase 1, and his Smite career in general. But first, I have to start off asking Whit about the Guy J pickup. How is bringing a new team member onto the squad been so far? I'm sure it's been something new at least.
Yeah, no, I mean it's been interesting. Obviously we're in kind of a weird spot
Mm-hmm.
right now, but so we have Snoopy role swapping as well, and then we have Guy as a rookie, and
Yep.
we weren't particularly doing great before either of those swaps anyway. So it's
Mm-hmm.
definitely was already an uphill battle.
Sure.
I think for like what it's worth, Guy's been really good. He's
Mm-hmm.
had a good attitude. He's been good about learning, and he's progressing really fast.
Yeah.
You can't necessarily see it reflected in the standings, but he's grown a lot as a player really fast. I'm pretty happy with him so far.
I think that's definitely apparent in the gameplay for sure, because last week's games compared to the week before, I think there's definitely a marked improvement in the
Yeah,
way Guy J has played, which is one of the big things I think you have to measure rookies on is how much they adapt to the league as a whole. Can you talk
for
about that a
sure.
little bit? Like how he's adapting to the league? Are there things that you've noticed? Maybe like old ranked habits or stuff that he's struggling with still?
Yeah, so I would say he's played the game for like a little while now, but he only just recently gotten competitive, like
Mm-hmm.
even SML, just like half a year ago or something.
Sure, sure.
And so he's had definitely there's a lot of like bad habits that he's probably had from like just playing the game for so long without being competitive.
Yeah.
Like for example, I played less than a year before I was in competitive. He's
Mm-hmm.
played like a few years before even touching it. So there's definitely going to be a lot of stuff that he has to learn kind of the hard way
Yeah.
in terms of like positioning, like priorities. There's just a lot he has to think about that he didn't have to think about before.
Okay.
Um, I think a lot of rookies kind of have to go through that same kind of learning process, and it's
Mm-hmm.
important that you're patient with them through that time because it's something that every player's had to do.
Sure. Do you think that having a longer phase in phase two is going to be beneficial to picking up newer players because there are more games to like get experience and things like that? Is that something that you're kind of banking on a little bit?
Yeah, no, I mean that's definitely true, and a good point to bring up as well. It is kind of an exhausting split with so many games, but
Mm-hmm.
for us, it's actually better. At this point, we've had a pretty rough start, so it is still a bit early to say so, but obviously, it's the Worlds is the most important time of the year, and so we're just progressing as fast as we can to be as good as we can for that time of the year, and we still have time, and it's good that the phase is longer to give us more practice in real games to achieve that. So,
Sure, sure.
yeah.
I like that you bring that up because I've talked to Neil and Sam about this, and they're both of the mind that it doesn't, the phase isn't really matter too much as long as you make the dance, you can make some noise, is sort of their opinion. But on the other sort of flip side of that, I know Mike really likes to get first seed and things like that. Where do you sort of fall on that spectrum? Are you someone who is leaning more towards like just get to worlds and if we get there we can make some noise, or you like having the consistent finishing?
Yeah, I think in an ideal world, we'd like to place better throughout the split as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I think like for just mental health and just for the longevity of things, especially with the way things can go, sometimes it's better to think the way that Sam and Neil do. For Mike, I think it affects him in less a way because he so consistently finishes in that top end.
Sure,
And I
sure.
don't think it's necessarily that Sam and Neil are trying less than Mike to achieve that goal. They just don't want to put themselves out there like mentally, and like they don't need their moods aren't reliant on every SPL game that they have.
Mm-hmm.
And I think especially like for us, that's the better mentality to have. If we thought of every SPL game as like that important, and then we were doing like this poorly, like no one's like mental would last very
Sure,
long.
sure. I
No one
totally
likes to
understand
lose,
that.
but that's
Yeah.
just how it's got to be.
I know you're talking about the long phase maybe being arduous, and I know when I was talking to Sam, he said that Mike was a little bit concerned maybe about burning out and things like that. Is that something that you guys are concerned with as well? Especially because, there are some long-standing veterans on your team, like you and Variety and Snoopy, and even Scream all come to mind as being people who've played in the league for a long time. And 3.5 months is definitely like the longest phase that we've ever had in the SPL. Is burnout something you're concerned about as a team, or even individually?
Yeah, I think it just varies from player to player. Like Scream, for example, has mentioned he doesn't think it would affect him, but I think your average person, it probably will affect them. And it's definitely something you need to keep in mind. If I'm not mistaken, this is the longest phase we'll ever have. And I think with Corona going on and everyone being stuck inside most of the day and us not being able to play in the studio, burnout is a real problem that everyone needs to like consider. It doesn't mean you should be complacent, but it does mean that you should take everything, I think, with a grain of salt.
Sure.
Just because humans are humans.
You feel like
We've all been playing a long time.
that the long phase also maybe favors some of the teams that can take advantage. Like, I kind of imagine, like, if you're winning consistently at the start, you may burn out closer to the end, and that may give a chance for some of the lower seeded teams to make up games and things like that. Is that something that you guys even think about? I imagine it's mostly like just looking towards the next game and the next draft and things like that. But do you guys look at macro things like that at all when you're considering the league?
Yeah, it's definitely the cliche answer to say just looking forward to the next game. I think it really just kind of depends on the team, honestly. Like,
Sure.
I couldn't tell you which teams would be like adversely affected by this long phase. I can tell you that if I had to guess, the teams that play like more traditional or just play every person on their team, like Sanguine's perfect example, they play like one of three characters at any given time. It's easier for them, I would say, probably just because they don't have to put as much thought process into picks and bans.
Sure,
Like teams
sure.
like us, we play a lot of kind of like different stuff and we kind of change week to week, and that's harder to do in a long phase. So I think the teams that are like more like meta slave, for lack of a better term, teams, it's probably a bit easier for them to play in these long phases.
Sure. Because they don't feel like they have to keep innovating and things like
Yeah,
that.
exactly.
They can just like follow what the meta picks are and
they just
not
play
worry too much.
standard.
Yeah.
They don't have to put a ton of thought like week to week into like countering or like drafting new team comps and stuff.
Sure. So I know I was talking a little bit about how a lot of your team are veterans of the league and things like that. Does it feel like you guys are sort of mentoring and or molding Guy J into being like the SPL ADC that you guys want him to be? Is that like a feeling that you're having?
Molding is one word for it. I would say like it's more like giving him the room to make the decisions for himself. I think that if you like put a rookie in this kind of situation, you just always have to like tell them what to do all the time. You don't let them make their own mistakes.
Sure.
And you just try to like mold them into the player that you want to be. I think that it's going to be like not work out the way that you want it to, because when it comes down to it and they have to make decisions for themselves, which you really have to do quite often in Smite, it's going to like affect them in a bad way. So I think we're just leaving space for him to grow into the player that we expect him to be.
That's a great answer. I really actually didn't expect you to say that. That's a very interesting and great way of putting it. I really like that. Man, let me lose my train of thought here.
It's no problem. I played with a lot of like rookie-ish players like over the years, like people just like on their first teams. Like I've seen it like happen all kinds of different ways. So I feel like I have pretty good insight on like how it feels to in that position and what it takes to like make it work out.
Yeah. Speaking of Guy J, how are the comms and things like that? Is he pretty active in the comms? I know a lot of times we hear about ADCs being a bit of like shot callers and things like that, especially for like Gold Furies and things like that. Is he sort of taking up those responsibilities, or is he still sort of feeling it out a little bit?
Yeah, that's definitely one of the big points of learning, because that's not something he's ever had to do.
Sure.
At least in this capacity. And learning how to like shot call, especially in an environment with 4 experienced players, and like making sure your voice is heard and having the confidence to like make the call that you know is right, is definitely a process that takes time. He's come a very long way in it, especially over the past week or two. It's obviously not something that you can see on the cast like directly.
Sure.
But that is definitely like one of the things that he's for sure had to like we really had to like kind of beat in, like, we need you to take a little bit of control over these objectives. You're our main objective damage. Like, whatever you think is good, just let us know. even if we're saying something else, have the confidence to like call us off or ask us to do what you want to do.
Sure, sure. All right. I guess now is as good a time as any to ask about what your thoughts are on mid-season changes. Are there any items, new favorite items that you might have, or like how do the map changes affect you, and what do you think about them? Are you generally happy with the changes that were made, or what are your thoughts on the mid-season changes?
So there's a lot of stuff that happened. I think that assassins became a bit more potent, especially the auto attack assassins.
Yeah.
For me personally, that's not the most fun thing ever to deal with, like the Callies and the Nemesis.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's necessarily bad. Those characters have had a little bit of time before they've been in the limelight, so it's fine. Mages got nerfed on quite a few items. Soul Reaver, Flat Pen, probably most of it pretty deserved. So that's been taking some getting used to the amount of damage output. That's definitely like changed for me.
Sure.
Mid's a bit safer now with the wall around the mid camps. And Hicade is an absolute monster of an item.
Yeah.
So that's all it's definitely one of the biggest mid-season patches I've seen in a while in terms of like how it's shaken things up. The meta picks like almost entirely changed.
Yeah, definitely.
Which is cool. I mean, I'm not going to complain about that. It's nice to see new characters. I mean, I don't really love like characters like Freya being in the meta, but it's only like natural that she'll come back in. From time to time.
And almost, I think there's a bit of nostalgia with Freya, especially.
Yeah.
As you mentioned her specifically, like they reverted her back to basically a past form. It wasn't even like a buff or debuff, right? So I'm sure there was a bit of nostalgia. Like everyone's like, oh yeah, I miss playing Freya in the SPL. That's something that's fun to do,
Yeah, the magical ADCs from like season 2 and stuff, like being dominant. It's pretty reminiscent of that right now, honestly.
Yeah, exactly. I know we've started to see a bit of hunters in mid lane. Is that something that you're experimenting with? And on top of that, are there some underrated gods in any role that you think are maybe being underutilized or utilized in a wrong way or something like that?
Hunter mids, like, I don't know. Hunter mids I've played like a lot in the past, and like I think they definitely can work. I have been staying away from them as of late. I have practiced them a bit. It feels kind of like hard to fit them in, and it hasn't necessarily felt like strong for the way that we've been playing.
Sure.
So I'm not really sure on that front. Honestly, it's still something we're trying to figure out. We're trying to sort through a lot of stuff right now, given like how we're doing.
Yeah.
But in terms of characters that I think are like maybe underrated or like not picked enough, I'm not really sure. I think Jorm is still pretty good, and everyone's kind of stopped picking him. I think the Warriors Wrestling change wasn't like they changed his auto attack damage, which I mean, a solo laner could probably tell you better than me, but it seems like when I see him in games, he's still pretty potent. I'm surprised he's fallen off as hard as he has. So probably him, and I don't know. Honestly, I feel like people play a big variety of stuff, and like if I were to say Hair is underrated, like there's Zardes playing her. So
sure.
That's kind of the story with a lot of characters that I think are maybe a bit underrated. Someone's playing them and making them work somewhere. So I'm not really sure.
Sure. Speaking of someone playing them, you seem to be basically the only mid picking up the Baba Yaga. What is it that you see in the Baba Yaga as a pick, and what do you think that Baba Yaga brings that other mages might not be able to bring to the team comps and things like that? And I mean, obviously, don't feel like you have to give anything away or anything like that. But
of course,
what's the thought?
Yeah, no, I'm not afraid to like answer this question pretty honestly. I think that like most pro players can probably assume like why I would pick it anyway. I think that it's a safe character, and I think it's like a really good. It's like strong in the same parts of the game that like Merlin is. Maybe for example, except for she's weaker early. I think that people have less practice against her. I think, which is one thing I think is like pretty valuable, is when you play a pick that people haven't played against in a long time or have very little experience against. I think it can be like more effective. But I think that she's just safe. She scales like extremely well into the late game. And I think like if you pick her in a certain like jungle like solo matchups, they'll have basically an impossible time like killing you. Like I picked her recently in our set versus Cthulhu, but like it didn't work out. But the Cthulhu basically doesn't like pressure me the same way. Like playing Merlin in a lot of the same scenarios, he would have just chased me all the way to the Phoenix and I couldn't have done anything. But I'm pretty like I take like no damage from him as Baba Yaga, so that's like a big reason for considering her. Obviously, there's more to the game than not dying. You have to kill the enemies as well. So you have to kind of be careful about where you pick it.
Right.
I think she's still a pretty underrated character in general. I think a lot of people just don't like the way she plays. She's kind of awkward, especially
Yeah.
with the way her potions work.
Sure. You think that it's just like the awkwardness of her kit and things like that that leads other SPL mid laners to not be as excited to play her, whereas you're just like
Yeah.
comfortable with the uncomfortability, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, just compare her to like Merlin, like
Mhm.
any like mid player, especially like pro mid player, will probably tell you like it just feels good to play Merlin. Like his kit is just fluid.
Mhm.
Like the auto attack cancels like feel impactful.
Mhm.
Whereas like Baba Yaga is just this like big kind of like awkward mess with like weird long cast times and like slow abilities. So that definitely is probably it. It's probably doesn't feel that rewarding for most people to play her, and unless she's like so good that the people are probably just not going to want to play her. You know, she's just not a
Mhm.
fun character, I think, in a lot of ways.
You feel like she needs buffs or anything like that to maybe bring her into more viability, or is that, is it just people are not trying hard enough with her?
She probably does need buffs. The thing is, like, I don't know. You say like Janice, right? Like, no one really picks Janice, and
Mhm.
like,
Mhm.
does Janice really need buffs, right? Like, I feel like if he got like a second taken off his two, or like his ult cooldown reduced or something, like he would probably just be like a meta character that everyone has to
Sure.
play, and
Sure.
people don't really like playing against him. And I feel
Yeah.
like it would be similar with Baba. Like, I think if you pushed her a little bit, like it like increases scaling like too much on her other abilities or
Mhm.
something, you'd kind of put yourself in this weird scenario where I think she's actually pretty close to with some buffs. Like every mid would have to learn to play her,
Mhm.
just because she has an escape,
Mhm.
she has a CC immune ult, she has a ton of damage late game. She's really good on siege defense. Her passive is pretty strong.
Mhm.
I think she's very close to being a lot better, and it's kind of like the same thing with Persephone. I think like if Persephone wasn't as good as she was, I think
Mhm.
no one would play her just
Mhm.
because she's such a like pain to execute properly.
Sure.
But who knows? I'm just one guy.
I know it's a little bit awkward to probably give some predictions for your own team going now, but I'm just gonna ask anyway. Like, where do you think phase two is gonna go? You know, uh,
I think honestly, for us, we're just gonna need to see the green light at some point in time,
mhm.
and I'd like to hope that green light comes sooner rather than later. We've had a learning curve that other teams don't really have to deal with right now
Yeah.
with the role swap and a rookie,
Mhm.
and a team that wasn't particularly doing great beforehand. But
Mhm.
it is just a lot. And I don't want to say like we're gonna starting next week beat every team. I'd love to
Right.
do that,
Yeah.
but I think for us, we just something is gonna click at some point in time,
Yeah.
sooner rather than later. We're gonna see the
Sure.
green light, and then you'll just see us competing like with the top teams again and beating the teams that I consider to be the worst teams as well, like consistently again. And I just think we just need to get to that point where everything comes together for us. We find our identity,
Sure.
and then we'll be right back in form. Which for us would be ideal, honestly. Like as if we can hit that and gain our stride like before Worlds and keep
Mhm.
it until then,
Mhm.
that's all I can really ask for. At this
Mhm.
point, there's no point like in just beating ourselves up like over and over and over again when things aren't working. We just have
Mhm.
to realize the situation we're in and be fair to ourselves,
Sure.
even though everyone just absolutely hates losing like
Yeah.
more than you
Yeah.
can imagine.
Yeah. Of course. That's a very healthy mentality I think to have going into this. Because I remember I was talking to Barrow last week, and he basically had the idea that it's all about the teamwork in Worlds, and so if you can get that synergy figured out and strengthened in such a way that it's all locked and ready to go for Worlds, then you have a pretty good chance of beating any other team. Is that is that sort of how you feel as well?
Yeah, I think it's how my players have kind of been trained to think
Mm-hmm.
at this point. I think there's slight variations of that. Some people may be a little bit less like some people might just value like individual player skill a little bit more than that.
Mm-hmm.
I think Bear is definitely a guy who's going to tell you it's like more teamwork. Mike is probably a guy who's going to tell you it's a little bit more like player skill and like
Sure.
probably cohesion.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, I think most people can agree like being in the spot like that you want to be,
Mm-hmm.
like it's important to be in that spot at the right time, which is around the time of Worlds. I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
that's what everyone wants.
Okay. I think I'm gonna switch gears a little bit and focus a little
Cool.
bit more on phase one because you guys started off pretty hot. You guys beat Ghost I guess this was rival back then.
Yeah.
At the time, and I think things are looking pretty up for you. How were those first few weeks going for you guys? Was that were you thinking that this was something that was gonna, be strong going forward, and sort of what changed and how did that change that decided or that led you guys to decide that Ionic needed to be changed out?
Yeah, see, like at this point, it's like a long time ago, and like you definitely have like a lot of like hindsight, and like if things could have maybe been done differently.
Sure.
I think that in reality, um, there were a lot of things like breaking apart on our team at once, and I don't know if it was necessarily us breaking apart as much as it was other teams maybe growing a bit faster than us. I think if you look at the games back then versus the games now, I think a lot of the teams were like making a lot more mistakes than they are now. And we weren't necessarily improving at the rate we needed to improve at.
Yeah.
We were doing well, like you said. We got to a hot start, and then we had like a solid like 2 weeks where the dual lane was struggling like really hard. You didn't really see that in SPL, probably to the extent that we felt it in scrims, but it was making practice kind of like it just wasn't productive. We were playing every game from like a deficit right from the start, and just the way like Scream wants to play the game as well, that makes it pretty difficult
Sure.
for him to do what he wants to do. And when we looked back at it, the attitudes weren't necessarily the best. I don't want to say anyone had like a perfect attitude, but like in going back and looking back at the games and like trying to give advice and stuff, there was just like it didn't feel like Yannick really wanted to like improve or like accept like fault for the things he was messing up. There was kind of like some deflection and stuff. And so that combined with like the poor like dual lane performances and like some people just starting to clash with Yannick, it just seemed like the best move for us at the time, because it was a couple weeks without improvement for us and it felt like we were falling behind. And genetics was available. All of a sudden he was just about to finish school, and that seemed like maybe something that could pull us out of the hole. We also needed leadership, and he was like a pretty well-known like leader kind of personality. So we were hoping that would be a good fix for us. So that was the thought process.
So moving on towards genetics then, I mean, I imagine if COVID wasn't a thing, he would be in Atlanta at this point. Is that safe to assume?
Yes, it is safe to assume.
Okay.
That we definitely, even though things didn't necessarily go the best when he was on the team, it definitely was the plan to just keep him and grow with him, because he kind of fit what I think our team needed, and there wasn't really anyone else available to fill that role.
Sure. And was so the visa thing obviously is not in your control. That's, governments are controlling that. But
yeah.
Was there any chance that he would be able to play from across the sea, or was the ping just too much to deal with on a regular basis?
So yeah, it's that's definitely a consideration, but the main thing was we kind of needed to make a decision before the split started, and we didn't have the knowledge at the time to know if we would be coming back in a studio at any point in time. And if we were to be coming back in studio, we would have had to change him anyway.
Yeah.
If we just had to play like I don't know what information is out there, but if we were just going to be playing only the like qualifiers and worlds and stuff on like in person, then we could have kept him, but we didn't know, and we had to make a decision, and it seemed like it was like possible that we would be playing in studio during the regular season at some point.
I see. Okay.
And so that's just like the decision we had to make. Like in hindsight, like we could have like maybe still tried to make it work. The ping really was an issue. It was really limiting his god pool and stuff too. So it just seemed like the best option. Although there were just not good support options as well, like to replace him, which just made like obviously like we role swapped and we got a rookie, which I don't think like it's like their fault by any means that we're doing like the way we are doing.
Yeah.
But there definitely is a lot more that goes into the game besides just like if they're hitting their abilities or like able to play the lane. Like all these like support has like a role in the game that like Snoopy has like not done before, right? Like that we can't expect him to figure out right away. And the same goes for Guy, kind of for like different reasons that I mentioned before.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not playing great myself, so don't
Oh.
think I'm blaming anybody else.
Sure.
It's just been a kind of a mess, but we'll figure it out. I'm confident as long as we keep our heads.
Right. I'm just trying to maybe get at the specifics here. But was it like Hi-Rez said, hey, there's a possibility, so you need to have a roster that could possibly do this?
So there's 3 parties. It's us, Hi-Rez, and United.
Yeah, right.
And United, I think, especially like from their point of view, it's just a giant mess to deal with the visa, with all of this going on.
Mm-hmm.
Like paying that player and like being able to have them like legally like come into the States, and like how it all works out seemed to be pretty tough on them.
Yes.
And I think they were the ones, like, if it were up to them, it's just significantly easier if we could make something else work to get somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that was probably the biggest factor.
I see.
I think if it were totally up to the players, we would have stayed with them. And if it was totally up to Hi-Rez, which as far as Hi-Rez is concerned, it's just only like rules. So obviously they'd never make the decision, but if it were totally up to them, they'd probably vote for us to not have him either, to not deal with the visa stuff.
Right. Okay.
So we were kind of put in a weird spot, and we just kind of made the safe decision on like the behalf of our org and just like understanding the problems and the logistics of everything.
Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to make sure that it was sort of clear.
Yeah, and to be clear, like United like wants more than anything, maybe any org I've ever been with, for us to like succeed, and is willing to give us all the tools that we need. They would never make us like get rid of them like on their own. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, it wasn't like their decision. We were still like talking to them about what would be the best for us. So I don't want anyone to think like they made us get rid of them, like period. It was definitely more complicated than that.
Yeah, I don't think it came across like that or anything, but
yeah, just for people out there, you know.
It was kind of a sudden change, and I don't think a lot of people expected it, especially considering, you know, the way Genetics had played up until then. So
yeah, no, he was good. I mean, I think he still has a lot of potential as a player. I expect him to make his way into the league at some point in time.
Sure.
And he's a rookie as well, you know. So, and he's a rookie in a leadership position too. Yeah, and that especially going up against like guys like Mike and like Neil and stuff who've been doing it for a long time, that's like a big ask. So I was pretty impressed with the way he handled things.
Sure. So you basically have had this super sub moniker that's sort of been attached to your career, at least early on, for a long time before you settled in mid lane. Is that something that you worked on, being sort of, I know the wiki calls you a multi-role specialist and all of those things, so is that something that you consciously were working on, being good in all the roles? And
yes.
And now that you've like focused on one role, is there, you know, you sort of done both sides of the spectrum, really. Do you feel strongly one way or the other?
I think I'm more of like just a main role player now. I've been playing some like off role more lately, but like my off role isn't like what it used to be.
Sure.
Back then, like for those who don't know, I really my goal was to find a way to be part of one of the better teams, which ended up being like Cloud9.
Yeah.
And I wanted to just like see how they like talked and see how they played and learn from them. So that way, if I were to be playing pro again, after that I could like take some of what I learned, because I felt like I was kind of at a wall, like after like my first year and a half of playing, where I was like stuck on bad teams and I didn't really like know what you needed to do to win. Like I could watch them, but I didn't understand their thought processes. And so I saw this opportunity to maybe like join Cloud9 as like a sub or a coach. And so I just like played ranked all day, every day, and I just tried to play every role, and I just wanted to be like the most appealing option they could ever like consider. And it was kind of close. I think like Andy didn't really want me, didn't really like me, because I was like bad attitude and ranked or something.
Sure.
But I was just trying to make myself as like, I wanted to make myself the best option where like they'd be dumb to not get me, and like being able to play all the roles in case I did have to sub. Like there wasn't really a lot you can do to like be the most appealing as a sub. You just have to be like, you have to be like a cool guy. They want to be around you, and like you have to be available, and you have to be like, in case they do need you, you want to be as good as possible. So that was my thought process. And after I like grew through the years and like had a more solidified spot as like one of the better mids, I didn't care as much about that. So I just mostly focused on my own role, And so that's kind of where I'm at now.
Hmm. Another thing that's sort of well known about you is that you are known for signature picks. We talked about the Baba Yaga a little bit earlier, but the Yanis is a signature Hurriwind pick. Um, and I talked to Aurora about maybe signature picks being more important in SPL level play because of the way it forces teams picks and bans. Do you feel like having signature picks is something that is useful for all the roles and all your teammates in that sense?
It's only particularly useful, in my opinion, if they're very effective in certain situations, or people have to ban them, or people
Sure.
feel like by banning them, they put themselves in a better spot to win the game. So Hercules is a good example. Not every sport plays it, but every team feels like they need a top 3 ban Hercules and Umoja against Aurora. That puts them in immediately every time before the picks and bans have really even begun in a really good spot.
Sure.
So if you can do that, if you can like if people were top 3 banning Janice against me, I would feel like it was a lot more useful, or like Bobby or whatever. But it's not at that point, so I don't consider it to be like as beneficial. If you can gain that respect and like earn the rights to like an easier pick bans, then I think it's worth it is really worth that like investment into those signature picks.
Sure. I mean, I say that because I think you're the only one who's even picked up the Yanis in season 7, right? I don't think anyone.
Yeah,
else
and I think it's actually looked like pretty good for the most part.
Yeah, I think so as well.
It's not something that people can't deal with, and I think a lot of people consider it to be like a one-dimensional character. Like, don't get by the all, and we can't lose. I obviously don't see it that way. I wouldn't pick the pick if I thought it was that one-dimensional.
Sure.
But I can definitely see like why people still feel like it's not like an issue. And I also don't pick like people don't really know why I pick it when I pick it. I think as well. It's not like I pick it every set. So
yeah, okay. I want to ask a little bit about Dig last year, since you were the only North American on a whole squad full of Europeans. How was that experience for you? What was that like? Especially, them all coming here from a different place and you sort of being the native person,
Yeah, I think it was good and bad. We did well generally throughout the year.
Yeah.
We didn't have the best showing at Worlds. We made semis like pretty convincingly.
Sure.
We were playing against a sub, and then we got swept in the semis, which sucked. So the year didn't end on the best note. Everyone was still like okay with one another. Like we spent time even after Worlds. It wasn't like everyone hated each other, but there were definitely a lot of like learning I had to do and like coming to be like on the same page like on things that I didn't necessarily like agree with in terms of like how the game should be played and whatnot. There's like definitely an EU mindset, and I definitely had more of an NA mindset. And that was definitely like a sometimes painful learning process for me. I wasn't always like ready to just like lie down and like die and not like give my opinion even if I was in like the major minority. And that's not like always the most fun position to be in.
Sure. What would you say were the biggest differences you could tell between the NA mindset and EU mindset now that you brought it up a little bit?
Well, so for NA and EU mindset, I would say I definitely was more. I think EU mindset focuses on a lot of things that I wouldn't focus on. Like they'll like hyper focus on like some builds or some like things that I would consider to be more minor things happening in the game, and they would consider them to be like way more important than I did. I think that's why you would see like back in the day like games with 10 urchins in EU games, because they identify that as a major problem. They think it's so broken that every person needs to build it. And I think that's like more of an oversimplification to a problem that's more complex. I think that is kind of like a more like EU approach in at least the history of Smite. I don't think it's necessarily always the wrong approach. I think sometimes it is the right approach. But you'll notice that like NA teams will generally like not like make these quick jump decisions about things being like too strong, like in terms of items or picks. They don't. I feel like we have maybe a little bit of overconfidence in thinking we can deal with things that we haven't seen before. Whereas EU players are like, okay, that's broken. Game 3 of a set, they lost to like 5 Urchins on the other team. They're like, okay, we need to do that as well. We're going to lose. NA players would not do that. EU players would in general. And that is definitely my best explanation of like what the difference between mindsets is between NA and EU. And not to say one is necessarily better than the other, but I definitely had my camp, and I was not on the same page in some of those arguments.
Sure. As someone who sort of experienced both sides of the Atlantic Ocean, so to speak, we hear the casters sort of talk, at least back in the day, they used to talk about how EU was a little bit more methodical and maybe not as footloose in terms of getting into skirmishes and things like that. Is that something that you especially noticed working with the Dig Boys? Or did that sort of change? Did the identities of these two regions sort of meld with everyone being in Atlanta last year?
Yeah, I think they melded like for like multiple reasons. I think like the main reason is just like you said, like everyone was kind of melding together last year.
Yeah.
And so like you saw like NA people being kind of a little bit infected by EU people and the other way around.
Sure.
We kind of come to meet in like a little bit more of a middle ground at this point. Probably healthier. But yeah, that's probably it. Just the mix, like you mentioned, that's led to that.
Yeah, because I noticed now, like Ghost the other day picked up 4 sledges in an SPL game, so that seems like a pretty good example of your EU mentality there, right?
Yeah, definitely a little bit. I mean, to be fair, think about it. Twig is the one who's probably the most questionable guy that's building it in mid, right? He's the EU player, right? So, I mean, it makes more sense. Your soul laner, your supporter picking it, right?
Yeah.
But yeah.
Okay. I think I have one last question, and then I'll give the stage to you. You have a soapbox. You can rant or rave about anyone. But first, how do you feel about the current state of ranked? I don't know. Have you been playing it much?
Yeah, I've probably been playing more than I have in a really long time. I don't necessarily know why that is. Maybe because I kind of feel like I have something to like prove a little bit. Ranked doesn't really, in reality, ranked doesn't really prove too much. But it's like a way for me to like find success in a time where things like aren't going the best.
Sure.
I think ranked is fine right now. I would say it's like probably over the course of time, it's somewhere in the middle. I mean, there was a point in time when there were gold players in every like Masters game for a long time. That was by far the worst, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And the best was probably the beginning when everyone was just a little bit more excited, I think, about the game. That's a player issue, not like a matchmaking issue or a ranked issue.
Right.
Where you'd have 5 people in curse on both teams every game, like 10 pro games every game.
Yeah.
You don't really get that anymore. You have a lot of pros that just don't even play ranked at all right now, and that definitely hurts the process too.
Sure.
But I'd say it's overall fine. Nothing crazy, nothing like too bad. You see, the thing is, like streamers, for example, at this point in time, like you look at like Zap back in the day used to be like a pretty big rager in ranked. He used to get like really upset like pretty consistently.
It wasn't even that long ago, to be honest. Like...
yeah, I guess it wasn't that long ago. We're not that old, huh? Getting there, but not quite.
Yeah.
But now, like I think like he has like learned like for his own sanity, he just needs to look at it in a different way,
Sure.
And I think I don't blame them. I would have to do the same thing if I was them. But that kind of like hurts the rank process a little bit. Like Zap is like 2600 MR, but he's like off rolling and he's just like talking to chat and like drinking and having a good time. You absolutely can't blame him.
Yeah.
But we're far from like the apex that rank used to be. I think he's a perfect example. I mean, I love Zap, but
sure.
You would agree.
He was in like 2300 MMR at some point in the season.
Yeah,
so,
I'm not surprised.
It's been rough out there for Zap. I think that's all the questions I really have for you. Is there anyone you want to shout out or call out or the stage is yours right now?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. In a way, like just shout out to my team. Like things have been terrible, honestly. Like I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. It's been really bad in terms of like how I've been performing, and it's been hard on everyone. Me, Scream, Harry, Snoopy. Have never done, even in the history of ever in our time in SPL, been the last place team in a split at any point in time, instead of like maybe some like fluke first game or something. And I see like it have effect on people, but I still see people being able to like find ways to be positive, and I really appreciate that. And I think like they deserve like a shout out for that. Like I hope for the sake of all of us that the ship does turn around soon, and I think it will, but shout out to them. Shout out to United. They've been very patient with us. Winning matters a lot to them too as an org. It's kind of like their brand, and we've definitely let them down on that front. But they've been patient and supportive of us regardless, and I really appreciate that as well.
Sure.
And there's fans out there that are still being really positive too, which I'm surprised. I honestly thought everyone would have turned their backs on us at this point, but they're still like having some faith, so I appreciate that too.
Yeah.
And Claude's, there's a lot of teams that are bad out there that we've been losing to. You're still bad, and we will still beat you at the end of the day. So don't get too overconfident that you're farming us in scrims right now.
It wasn't that long ago we were farming you. You gonna name some names here?
Oh, they know who they are.
Oh, they know who they are?
Yeah. Let's see who gets a pass. Saying gets a pass. I love Shinto. I want to give Ghost a pass, but I don't want to feed Mike's ego anymore.
Yeah, you shouldn't do that.
So, I don't think anyone really deserves a pass, honestly. I think we'll come back, honestly. So.
Well, I hope you guys come back as well, because it's always good to have the most competitive league we can have. So as a fan, I know I appreciate those sorts of leagues and those sorts of games where anyone can win and it's always very close. So I want to thank you for coming on. It's been a great time getting to talk to you and hear your thoughts on how things have been going with your team and Smite in general. And I just really want to give you my thanks and appreciation for coming on. I really, really appreciate it.
I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to have like a voice to be able to like explain some of the stuff, especially like considering everything what's been going on. Honestly, a lot of the questions are really good. I got to like speak on a lot of things I wanted to talk about. So thank you as well.
Yeah, and I hope we can catch each other at Worlds. Fingers crossed. Hopefully, COVID doesn't.
We'll make. I think people will make something work. Don't tell everyone though. We'll make something work. I think.
All right, that sounds good. All right, thanks a lot, Kurt.
I appreciate it, man.